It began with a lone post on a niche true crime board. Someone uploaded a grainy image of a smiling young woman from 1987 and asked a straightforward question. Does anyone recognize her? In a matter of hours, that question would spin into one of the most discussed cold case resurfacings the web had ever witnessed. The picture wasn't some curiosity. It was the missing piece to a mystery that had haunted an entire town for nearly 4 decades. Back in the summer of 1987, when shoulder pads were in fashion and cassette tapes still ruled car dashboards, a quiet community in northern Oregon was shaken by something it wasn't prepared for. On July 23rd at dawn, a jogger found a body at the forest edge. The woman, mid-20s, lay half-shrouded in pine needles, her clothes ripped, her belongings strewn about. No identification, no purse, no evidence of a struggle anywhere around. Only the eerie quiet of the forest holding its secrets. Detectives named her Jane Doe 87-07. They pursued the case vigorously. Composite drawings were published in local dailies, posted on bulletin boards, even sent to surrounding states by mail. Hundreds of tips were received, and each one went nowhere. The only tangible evidence that held promise was a minute bit of biological material found under the victim's fingernails. At the time, DNA analysis was still in its infancy. The technology was there, of course, but it was slow and costly, and nowhere close to the forensic powerhouse it would one day be decades from then. And so the sample was sealed up, recorded, and stored in an evidence freezer, just another file on the mountain of cold cases. Fast forward 36 years. The case had long since devolved into a footnote in Oregon's criminal history, recalled only by a small group of retired detectives and the families who had never forgotten their lost daughters. Then came the post, the smiling woman's photograph. Internet sleuths enjoy a challenge, and within a matter of minutes, comments began pouring in. Some believed she resembled a diner waitress outside of Portland. Others swore she looked like a college-age kid who went missing at the same time. And then came the comment, "Look at the 1987 Tillamook Jane Doe."
The similarity is striking. That one sentence lit the fuse.
A Reddit commenter named Cold Tray started gathering up all they could find on the case. Newspaper articles, scanned police reports, even some old radio interviews had been taped and digitized. In a matter of days, their posts had thousands of upvotes. Amateur sleuths began drawing connections law enforcement hadn't made, comparing facial features, timelines, and missing persons reports. It was internet sleuthing at its best in a state of complete disorganization and unexpectedly effective. One of the lurkers in that thread was a retired detective by the name of Alan Reeves. He was a rookie on the Tillamook case back in '87 and had never forgotten it. Reeves looked at the photo and felt that old tingle again, the combination of fear and resolve that only cold cases ever evoke. He contacted the county sheriff's department, wondering if evidence box from the case still existed. Miraculously, it worked. Reluctantly, some convincing later, the department finally assented to send the decades-old DNA sample for reanalysis via up-to-date techniques. The findings stunned all. When the DNA profile returned, it didn't only confirm Jane Doe 8707. It matched 2 distinct entries in the national database, one from a missing persons report by a Washington State Police Department in 1987 for a woman named Laura Mitchell, and another from an entirely unrelated sample associated with a 2015 burglary in Arizona. The match didn't add up. Why would the same DNA show up in 2 cases nearly 3 decades apart in 2 different states linked to 2 utterly different crimes? That's when things took a strange turn. Reporters began swarming. True crime YouTubers were promising a shocking DNA twist in their next videos. Everybody wanted to know, was it contamination, a mix-up at the lab, or something even stranger? Reeves, however, didn't care about viral fame. He needed answers. He opened Laura Mitchell's file 24, vanished after a night out with friends, last spotted getting into a blue pickup truck. The vehicle was seen near the Tillamook forest that same summer. While the Arizona burglary DNA hit proved to belong to a man named Darren Cole, a drifter who had an extensive criminal history. He'd done time for theft and assault, but nothing resembling murder. Nevertheless, Reeves felt sure that Darren was involved. He asked for Darren's entire DNA profile and saw something just short of miraculous. The genetic markers connecting Darren to the Tillamook sample weren't from him directly. They represented a familial match. That is, Darren wasn't the perpetrator.
But someone who was related to him could be.
Now, here's where the internet did what it does best. Research, guess, and sometimes inadvertently crack cases. Genealogy buffs started constructing a family tree for Darren Cole based on public records and ancestry databases. In no time, they had filtered down to one possible relative who matched the age and location category, Darren's older brother, Michael Cole. A name that up until then had never surfaced in any police report, any witness testimony, or any missing person listing. Detective Reeves brought this information to the sheriff's office. They were initially skeptical. The possibility of an online group solving a 1987 murder was difficult to accept. But the DNA was not capable of deception. They traced Michael Cole, who had been living under an alias in Nevada. When questioned, Michael denied it all. He said he'd never even been to Oregon. But Reeves picked up on something, the man's nervous mannerism of touching his left wrist. On the autopsy photos taken in 1987, the victim had defensive cuts consistent with someone who wore a watch on that same wrist. Reeves asked for a voluntary DNA sample. Michael declined. That was within his rights, but it was suspicious. With the partial match, investigators procured a warrant and obtained a discarded coffee cup from Michael's trash. Within a week, the lab results were in.
The DNA matched the 1987 Tillamook sample precisely.
News spread quickly. Cold case solved by DNA match after 36 years. The headline screamed. Social media went wild. Millions followed the story in real time as outlets ranging from the Oregonian to CNN reported on it. What began as a low-key Reddit post had become an international debate about justice, technology, and the power of curiosity and action. But even as the world celebrated, one thing still lingered. Why did Michael Cole do it? What was his relationship to Laura Mitchell, the woman whose smiling face began this whole chain of events? The reason, as detectives would come to learn, was even more sinister than anyone anticipated. Cumulative word count, 1,000 words. When the story broke that a 36-year-old cold case had been cracked, the public demanded every last detail. Reporters staked out the tiny Tillamook County Sheriff's Office, true crime podcasters scrambled to shoot breaking news segments, and Reddit was filled with speculation. Some viewed the case as a victory of forensic science in the modern age. Others criticized it as a warning about online sleuths playing amateur detective. But for Alan Reeves, it wasn't about news headlines. It was about finally taking Laura Mitchell's name away from him and making Michael Cole pay for what he'd done. The arrest was unobtrusive. Detectives arranged with Nevada law enforcement to apprehend Michael outside his home in a remote area just outside Carson City. He did not put up a fight when they approached. In fact, witnesses said he looked almost relieved, like a man who'd been waiting decades for the knock on the door. Reeves was flown in to assist with the interview. After hours of small talk and denials, Reeves leaned forward and slid a faded photo across the table, the one from 1987, Laura smiling, her hair wind-tossed, carefree. Michael's gaze fell to the photograph, and for the first time he ceased speaking. Then, barely audibly, he said, "She wasn't supposed to die." Those words struck Reeves like a freight train. 36 years of silence, and the story was finally unfolding. Michael said he had met Laura at a roadside tavern on the outskirts of Portland. She was thumbing her way south, trying to get to California to see a friend. He gave her a ride, one she should never have taken. Michael said they'd fought after taking a break and parking in the woods, that she became frightened, attempted to flee, and he panicked. What ensued was something he swore he'd been attempting to forget since. Police officers, naturally, weren't about to accept his confession without confirmation. They required corroboration, proof to support it, and they received it. Search parties returned to the scene of the crime with advanced technology, ground-penetrating radar, drones, and updated mapping equipment. What they found close by was shreds of fabric buried deep under years of forest detritus. Forensic analysis confirmed it was identical to the jacket Laura was wearing at the time of her disappearance. DNA from fibers matched Michael's, closing the case beyond any possible doubt. But as the internet would soon discover, this wasn't merely one man's crime. The more investigators dug, the more bizarre the connections became. Remember Darren Cole, Michael's younger brother, the one whose DNA initially sparked the database match? It turned out that Darren had been interviewed in another disappearance a decade earlier, in 1992, a missing woman in Arizona whose case had never been cracked. The parallels were unnerving. A young woman seen for the last time near a highway, personal belongings found scattered, no struggle, and no resolution. Were the Cole brothers responsible for more than one murder? The internet disagreed. Theories abounded overnight. YouTubers picked apart each word of Michael's confession, slow-moing his mugshot, scrutinizing his posture, cross-checking his previous addresses with other cold cases. Hashtags #cold confession and #Tillamook truth began trending. Everyone wanted to suspend reality long enough to think there had to be a larger tale, a serial killer who'd managed to slip past the cracks for so long. Reeves, however, was more measured. He'd witnessed the way viral scrutiny could warp a case, making guesswork reality and swamping out the truth. He concentrated on what he could demonstrate. Reeves and the forensic team reopened Michael's 1992 Arizona Vanishing Act while Michael sat in waiting for trial. They compared old samples against Michael's DNA. Nothing. No match. That didn't eliminate him entirely, but it did indicate something else. Perhaps Michael wasn't the sole member of his family with black secrets. Michael's trial went forward the next spring. The courtroom was filled, not only with reporters, but with individuals who tracked the story on the internet for months. There was something dreamlike about seeing a case conceived in the analog 1980s come to a close in the digital era, live-streamed, hashtagged, and endlessly analyzed. The prosecution presented a careful chronology, Laura's disappearance, Michael's activities, the DNA evidence, and his own partial admission. The defense attempted to allege contamination and coercion, that the DNA might have been transferred indirectly.
But the jury wasn't having it.
Within only 6 hours of deliberation, they convicted Michael Cole of second-degree murder. As the judge read out the verdict, Reeves breathed for what felt like the first time in years. He'd spent a career and a half having nightmares about this case, and now finally, Laura Mitchell had justice. But that gratification had a peculiar aftertaste. Because the more Reeves examined the timeline, the more one question kept nagging at him. Why now? Why had Michael's DNA only recently been marked in 2023, when his brothers had been on the system since 2015? Had the sample from 1987 been uploaded at the time, the match would have appeared years sooner. Somewhere along the way, something had held it up. Reeves started digging into the chain of custody reports and came across a chilling piece of information. The original DNA sample in the Tillamook case hadn't been entered into the national database until the previous month when it landed on the Reddit thread. Which meant someone somewhere had recently reopened the file prior to the internet discovering it. Was it coincidental? Perhaps, but Reeves had learned many years ago that coincidence was another term for clue. He began to question things. Softly, initially. Who had the authority for the new testing? Who processed the sample? The forms indicated a private lab hired by the sheriff's department, which dealt in genealogy testing. The technician who appeared on the report was Emma Doyle. When Reeves called to speak with her, he expected a routine conversation. Instead, what he got was hesitation, the kind that comes from knowing more than you're allowed to say. Emma admitted that she'd received the case from an anonymous requester, someone who'd paid out of pocket to have the old evidence reanalyzed. She didn't know who they were. She just followed the instructions. Reeves's instincts took over. If an outsider had viewed the case, it wasn't only unusual, it was illegal. He requested the payment records from Emma, hoping for a name, a clue, something. What she provided instead was a shock. The payment had been made using an encrypted account set up with a pseudonym, Cold Trace.
The same username that initiated the Reddit thread.
Reeves leaned back in his chair, his heart racing. The individual who had apparently discovered the Jane Doe photograph online had also covertly ordered the DNA testing that broke the case wide open. That was not happenstance curiosity, that was manipulation. Someone had been fully aware of what they were doing.
But why?
And if Cold Trace wasn't a random internet troll, then who was it? A victim's relative? A retired police officer? Or, as some of the posters on the forums started to speculate, someone with a much more personal motive for unearthing the past? As Reeves gazed at the username on his screen, he couldn't help but sense that the tale wasn't finished. The DNA connection that shattered the internet had answered a mystery, but had only left another one gaping open. Reeves had spent decades believing in science, evidence, and timelines that were coherent. But the news regarding Cold Trace threw all that into disarray. He sat at his own kitchen table late into the evening, the faint glow of his laptop spilling pale light over piles of outdated reports. On one of the screens was the Reddit post that had rekindled the case. On the other was the payment history of the lab. Same username, same date, same digital signature. Whoever Cold Trace was, they hadn't simply been following. They'd been guiding the narrative from behind the scenes. He browsed the forum threads again, not this time reading them for facts, but for tone. The majority of users guessed or inquired. But Cold Trace? They nudged, led, and corrected. When someone posited that the victim was from another state, Cold Trace patiently deflected, check or aim missing person cases between June and August '87. When others argued about whether the forest was the correct place, Cold Trace said, look near mile marker 42. That wasn't idle curiosity.
That was someone who knew what was going on inside.
Reeves typed out each remark, underlining the trends. Whoever they were, they'd known where to search years before the results of the DNA test had been released. The only thing was, how? He reached out to the Reddit administrators in an official request for IP information. It wasn't simple. Electronic privacy statutes had tightened, particularly for sites notorious for anonymous users, but with a district attorney's warrant, Reeves at last received a match. The account was linked back to an email address that seemed familiar. When he checked it out, his gut fell.
The email address belonged to a reporter. Not any reporter, Sarah Mitchell.
The surname struck him like a punch in the gut. Mitchell. The same as Laura, the victim. Reeves explored Sarah's background, 31 years old, investigative journalist for a small online publication dedicated to cold cases and wrongful convictions. Her bio stated that she'd begun her career attempting to find out what had become of her mother, who disappeared in the 1980s.
That's when all the pieces fell into place.
Laura Mitchell hadn't been merely the name on a dusty missing persons report. She'd been a young mom. Her daughter, Sarah, had been just 1 year old when she vanished. And that daughter had grown into Cold Trace, the individual who solved the very case that took her childhood away. Reeves settled back in dismay. The surprise was nearly poetic, the killer's own daughter cracking the case of the mother's murder. But it also begged tough questions. How had Sarah obtained a sample of the DNA? How had she persuaded the lab to analyze it in the absence of proper authority? The solution, Reeves saw, could be ugly.
He contacted her personally, sending a tentative email.
Sarah, this is Detective Alan Reeves, Tillamook County. I think we should discuss your role in the 1987 case.
Within the hour, she responded,
I thought this day would eventually arrive. You are due for the truth. She met him the next morning at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of Portland. Sarah came in with a recorder clutched in one hand and a slim folder in the other. She was composed, near defiant. Before you ask, she said, pushing the folder along the tabletop. Yes, I used my credentials to get into the archived case files. I discovered my mother's name in an ancient police database several years ago, but nobody would listen.
So I did what any journalist would. I pursued the evidence.
Within the folder were duplicates of the lab request forms, blanketed with redactions, but clearly hers. I couldn't just sit around waiting for somebody else to care, she went on. The sheriff's office would always tell me the same thing whenever I called and asked them to reopen the case. No leads, no budget, no reason. So I took matters into my own hands. I created Cold Trace. I posted the picture, initiated the thread, and waited to see if the internet would do what law enforcement wouldn't. Reeves couldn't help but marvel at her resolve. It brought back memories of his own younger self, the one who'd entered the crime scene for the first time in 1987 and vowed to uncover the truth. But she'd gone way too far. Unauthorized testing, tampering with evidence chains. It was reckless, even illegal. You know you violated several laws, he said softly. Sarah nodded. And I'd do it again. Because if I hadn't, my mother would still be a nameless file in a drawer. Reeves didn't protest. She was correct in a manner of speaking. Otherwise, the case would have remained cold forever. But what unsettled him was not the ethics, it was the timing. You didn't just happen to stumble over this, Sarah, he said. You knew where to dig, where to look. Someone briefed you on something. She paused. Not someone, she replied softly. Something. She reached into her purse and produced a small cassette tape, yellowed with age, of the type used by police recorders in the late 80s. Reeves's pulse accelerated. Where did you find it? It was sent to me last year, Sarah replied. No return address, just a piece of paper with "You deserve to know."
They discovered a player at the counter, and when the tape started to roll, static filled the puns.
Voss grabbed up a pile of photographs and pushed one across the table. It was a gathering in a clearing, 3 men standing next to a pickup truck. 2 faces were distinct, Sheriff Price and a man Reeves did not know. The third, half facing the camera, was Heller.
Reeves exhaled. So he was involved.
Perhaps, Voss said. Or perhaps he was there to prevent it. I never learned which. Reeves took a slow breath, his thoughts weighing each option. You said someone's still hiding the secret. Who? Voss picked up a folder and opened it. Inside were printouts, emails, property records, contemporary, recent. You ever heard of Cascade Conservation Trust? Reeves furrowed his brow. The not-for-profit that oversees land grants around the old Pine Trail pathways? The same. They began to appear in 1990, just shortly after Price died. Same name, different shell companies from this business. The funds still flow, just neater now. Developers, investors, politicians. Name it. Someone made his original smuggling channels into an honest empire. Reeves watched pieces fall into place. And the tape? The photographs? You wanted Sarah to reveal them. Voss nodded. I knew she'd track the trail. And I knew you would as well. The 2 of you. Clean names, no connections to the old world. I didn't know anyone else I could trust. Reeves hesitated. Then what became of Heller? The fire crackled. Voss didn't respond for a moment. Then softly he said, He came to visit me 3 days before he vanished. Told me he was going to turn himself in, make a statement. He seemed tired, older than I had last seen him. I reminded him to take care. Next morning, his truck was missing. Reeves shivered. They silenced him, do you think? I believe he was aware of who was holding the strings at that point, and I believe he attempted to alert you. Voss presented him with another envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a single photo, a contemporary one dated only a month prior. It was of a man in a suit emerging from a black SUV. Reeves knew him instantly. Deputy Attorney General Mark Doran, the man now heading the reopened Tillamook case. Reeves blinked. You're telling me Doran's involved in this? I'm telling you he's inherited the same pipeline Price constructed, Voss said. He's used the trust to launder money through conservation projects for years. When Sarah's article came out, he panicked. He's the one who hired men to kill Heller, and he'll turn his sights on you next. Reeves gazed at the photo, the gravity of it sinking in. It wasn't a cold case any longer. It was an active conspiracy. Voss filled 2 coffee mugs, pushed one across the table. You still want to continue where you left off? Reeves nodded slowly. We've already left it off. Voss grinned, tired but determined. Then you'll need backup. I'll give you all I have, records, tapes, coordinates, but you'll have to act quick. When Doran sees you've accessed that drive, he'll shut everything down. They sat through till dawn, assembling decades of corruption from a backwoods sheriff to the state capitol. Reeves did not get out of the cabin until the sun was just beginning to rise behind the tree line. The forest was bathed in gold, falsely serene. He looked back once, half hoping to see Voss standing at the window, but the curtains remained unmoving. The wind was the only sound, whispering through the pines and bringing with it the whispers of a past that would not lie still. Reeves hit the highway by the time his phone vibrated in his pocket with a message from an unknown number. It was a video file. He pressed play.
Static, then Heller's voice. Hoarse, low, urgent.
Alan, if you're hearing this, they know you found Voss. Don't trust Doran. He's not what he seems. They're everywhere now.
The recording cut off abruptly.
Reeves stared at the screen, the highway stretching endlessly ahead. For the first time in years, he felt the old spark of purpose flicker again, fear and determination intertwined. The case wasn't just open, it was alive.
And now so was the hunter.
Cumulative word count, 6,000 words. Reeves did not sleep that evening. Heller's message played in his head until sunrise seeped through the blinds. Every time he played it again, he picked up on some tiny new detail, the jagged edge of breath, the faint resonance of footsteps in the distance, the faraway thrum of traffic. Wherever Heller had taken that video, it was not in the woods. He'd been in a city. By mid-morning, Reeves was back in Portland, outside Sarah's apartment with a paper cup of coffee and a folder that weighed more than steel. Her face was pale when she opened the door, but her determination was clear. "You found him?" she asked.
I followed what's left of his trail, Reeves said. And something worse. The corruption didn't end with Price. It's hiding behind a government desk.
They worked through the next hour sifting through what Voss had provided him. Maps, printed letters, and a USB drive. Sarah plugged it into her computer. Rows of files came up, financial reports, email messages, even video segments from Cascade Conservation Trust Board meetings. At first glance, they appear mundane, discussions of restoration budgets, grant allocations, environmental alliances. But Reeves noticed some of the signatures, names from the original Pine Trail ledgers, the same shell companies resurrected under fresh branding.
And there it was, Mark Doran described as a consulting partner.
Sarah paged through additional files until she discovered an encrypted file labeled 1987A. She paused. "If this is what I think it is."
Open it, Reeves told her.
The password prompt flickered on the screen. She tried Price. Denied. Laura. Denied again. Then she keyed in Tillamook. The folder opened. There were printed pages of typed reports, meeting minutes, shipment records, payment slips, and a single audio file entitled nightcall_05_987.wave. Sarah pressed play. A male voice crackled through the speakers. Shipment confirmed. No locals reported. One civilian interference handled. Moved to phase 2. Then another voice spoke, level and calm. Reeves' stomach fell. It was Doran. "Ensure the deputy signs off. We don't want records leading back to the department."
No response. End of tape.
Sarah sat back, her hand over her mouth. He was involved already, all that time ago. Reeves nodded slowly. And now he's the one running the investigation. They both knew what that implied. If Doran caught on to how much they understood, he'd bury it again, this time with them in tow. Reeves tried to call Voss, but the number was dead. No answer, no voicemail. He left one message. "We have the proof. Stay off the grid." Sarah uploaded copies of the files to a secure cloud account, encrypting them under multiple aliases. "If anything happens to us," she said quietly, "these go public automatically." Reeves gave a grim smile. "Then let's make sure we're around to watch it happen." That afternoon, they set up a meeting with an old acquaintance of Reeves's, Lieutenant Dana Sue, one of the few individuals he still trusted within law enforcement. Sue met them in a parking garage, wary but inquisitive. "You're entering a hornet's nest," she warned after Reeves revealed the evidence to her. "Duran is untouchable at this point. He has political influence, federal contracts, powerful friends. If you accuse him without irrefutable evidence, you both will vanish under NDAs and counter-investigations." Reeves tapped the folder. "That's why we're not accusing him. We're exposing him to the public." Sue thought that over. "If you leak this, you'll torch bridges that you can't repair.
I already did that the day I reopened this case, Reeves replied.
Sarah added, we'll need protection. Legal, digital, everything.
Sue let out a sigh. I can't officially assist, but I can see to it that some people turn a blind eye for a few hours. After that, you're on your own.
They departed with a small window of time and an even smaller margin for error. At Sarah's apartment, they mapped out the plan. Sarah would write a follow-up piece with the fresh evidence, naming names but holding back direct accusations until the files were checked out by objective journalists. Reeves would arrange with a contact at a local station to post the audio anonymously so that it couldn't be traced back. Once this goes live, Sarah told him, there's no taking it back. Good, Reeves said. Truth shouldn't have an undo button. Night fell. Rain streaked the windows, city lights glimmering like nerves. Sarah typed, and Reeves reviewed each document, each cross-reference. They worked in silence, the only sound the soft hum of the computer and the occasional groan of the building. At a little after midnight, her phone vibrated. A blocked number.
She paused, then placed it on speaker.
A voice emerged, smooth, confident, unmistakable. Miss Mitchell, this is Deputy Attorney General Doran. I believe we need to discuss something. Reeves's heart rate accelerated. Sarah swallowed hard.
How did you obtain this number?
You've been very active, Doran said with a smile. Publishing counterfactuals, jeopardizing live investigations, trying to avoid having your name on something irresponsible is best. Maybe you'd like to deal with it in private. Reeves inched forward. You mean off the record where you get to dictate it? A brief laugh. Detective Reeves. Always the optimist. You were told to let the past be. Certain histories don't need to be rewritten.
Certain crimes don't need to be forgotten, Reeves retorted. The line clicked dead.
Sarah gazed at the phone.
He knows where we are.
Reeves breathed out slowly. Then we're running short on time. They loaded the lot, the drives, the files, the computer, and set off to the East Side radio station. The building was in darkness except for one studio light shining through frosted glass. Reeves's contact, a veteran producer named Marcus Lee, waited at the door.
You're playing with fire, Alan, Marcus said. If this is what you say it is, people at the top will want it out of here before dawn. Then let's ensure sunrise arrives first.
They posted the sound to the station's secure server. Marcus set it to air in the 6 a.m. news cycle, irreversible, once cued. As they emerged outside again, the rain had ceased. The air was fresh, charged. Sarah turned to Reeves and spoke in a whisper.
Yeah, he whispered. And now we find out who attempts to halt it.
Neither of them saw the black sedan parked half a block down, its lights off dark-tinted windows. Within a shadow picked up a phone, pressed one button, and spoke.
They've moved. Proceed.